Picture this. February 1943, the scorching Tunisian desert. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, the man who humiliated the British across North Africa, sits in his command trailer after one of the most lopsided victories of the war. His panzer divisions have just torn through inexperienced American troops at Kasserine Pass like a hot knife through butter. Over 6,000 American casualties in less than a week. Entire battalions raising white flags. Tanks, trucks, and supplies abandoned in panicked retreat. Rommel writes a private letter to his wife that night, and his words are ice-cold confident. The Americans are soft, poorly led, and utterly unprepared for real war. He believes one more hard push, just one, and he can hurl the entire American army into the sea before they ever figure out how to fight. Berlin listens. His generals nod. Victory feels inevitable. But here's the twist that still shocks military historians today. Exactly 3 weeks later, those same soft Americans stop Rommel's elite panzers dead in their tracks. They don't just hold ground, they fight with a ferocity and coordination that leaves German commanders stunned and scrambling. Rommel himself, already on a plane back to Germany because of failing health, sends urgent warnings to his successors. Do not underestimate these Americans anymore. They are changing, fast. Too fast. His warnings are ignored. And because they are ignored, the entire Axis position in North Africa collapses in less than 2 months. Over 250,000 German and Italian soldiers end up in prisoner cages. The road to Sicily, Italy, and eventually Normandy swings wide open. How does an army go from total humiliation to battlefield mastery in just 21 days? How does one single American general walk into a broken corps and turn it into a machine that terrifies the legendary Afrika Korps? And why did the Germans, masters of war for 4 brutal years, completely misread what was coming? This is the hidden turning point of World War II that almost no one talks about, a story of raw human transformation under fire, packed with fresh details from declassified letters, battle reports, and post-war interrogations of German generals who admitted, often bitterly, that they never saw it coming. Stay until the end, because what happened in those 3 weeks didn't just win North Africa. It revealed the secret behind America's unstoppable rise as a military superpower, a lesson that still shapes modern warfare today. Let's go back to the beginning and unpack exactly why Rommel felt so certain of victory after Kasserine. The battle raged from February 14 to 22, 1943, through the narrow Kasserine Pass in the Atlas Mountains, a natural gateway that should have favored defenders but became a graveyard for green American units. These were men of the U.S. II Corps, many seeing combat for the first time after landing in Operation Torch just 3 months earlier. Their commander, Major General Lloyd Fredendall, made decisions that post-war analysts still call catastrophic. He built an elaborate underground headquarters 70 miles behind the lines, so far back that he rarely saw the battlefield with his own eyes. Orders came down by telephone or crackling radio, often vague, sometimes contradictory. When German intelligence intercepted American communications, they heard confusion and panic, exactly what Rommel expected. Rommel's attack was textbook blitzkrieg, concentrated armor spearheaded by the veteran 10th and 21st Panzer Divisions, supported by deadly 88mm anti-tank guns and Stuka dive bombers. American M3 Lee tanks, with their outdated side-mounted cannons, couldn't match the range or penetration of German long-barreled 75mm guns. At Sidi Bou Zid on February 14, an entire American Armored Combat Command was surrounded and mauled, losing over 100 tanks in a single afternoon. By February 20, German troops reached the pass itself, routing infantry units that retreated without clear orders. Soldiers who had trained on flat American proving grounds suddenly faced coordinated air and ground assaults in rugged terrain. Morale cracked. Hundreds surrendered rather than fight isolated pockets. The numbers tell the story bluntly. Roughly 3,000 Americans killed or wounded, another 3,000 captured, and mountains of equipment left behind. Rommel's letter to his wife Lucy on February 23 laid it bare. Declassified decades later, it shows a commander at the peak of confidence. He wrote that American officers committed amateurish mistakes, unthinkable in any seasoned European army. He praised their material abundance, excellent equipment, good rations, but dismissed their fighting spirit and leadership as inadequate. If we receive reinforcements in time, he told her, we can finish them off completely. He estimated it would take the Americans 6 to 12 months to correct their flaws. In the meantime, one decisive blow could end the campaign. His assessment went straight to Berlin and to Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, Supreme Commander in the Mediterranean. Plans immediately began for a follow-up offensive in late March, targeting the area around El Guettar, open terrain perfect for German armor. Yet even as Rommel planned his knockout punch, forces were already aligning against him that he could not foresee. His own health was collapsing. Chronic stomach ulcers, high blood pressure, and exhaustion from 2 years of non-stop desert war. Supply lines across the Mediterranean were under constant Allied air and submarine attack. And most critically, on the Allied side, General Dwight D. Eisenhower was furious about Kasserine. He needed a fighter, someone who would shake the Corps to its core. On March 6, 1943, the very day Rommel launched a doomed final attack against Montgomery's British 8th Army at Medellin, Eisenhower made his move. Lieutenant General George Smith Patton Jr. took command of 2 corps. His arrival was pure drama. Sirens wailing, a gleaming staff car kicking up dust, Patton striding out in polished boots, pressed uniform, and those famous ivory-handled revolvers at his hips. Soldiers who had felt abandoned suddenly saw a general who looked like he had stepped out of a war movie. But Patton's theatrics masked ruthless purpose. Within days he began a purge. He relieved officers who had shown hesitation or poor judgment at Kasserine, sometimes on the spot. He promoted aggressive subordinates who understood mobile warfare. Discipline became ironclad, ties and steel helmets mandatory even in 100-degree heat, fines levied immediately for violations. Patton believed sloppiness bred defeat, crisp professionalism bred confidence. More importantly, he rewrote how the Corps fought. Night and day training hammered 3 core principles. First, immediate counterattack. No more passive defense waiting to be hit. When attacked, hit back harder and faster. Second, total integration of arms. Infantry, tanks, tank destroyers, and artillery trained together relentlessly so they moved as one organism. Third, overwhelming firepower at the decisive point. Patton introduced rigorous, time-on-target artillery techniques, where dozens of batteries fired so their shells landed simultaneously, creating devastating shock. Forward observers practiced until they could call accurate fire within minutes. Radio discipline tightened, chatter disappeared. Units ran live-fire exercises in the hills behind the lines, learning to conduct fighting withdrawals that traded space for German casualties rather than collapsing en route. Patton's greatest weapon, though, was psychological. He toured the front constantly, speaking directly to troops in his distinctive gravelly voice. He told them the Germans were tough, but Americans were tougher because they fought for something bigger. He publicly praised units that showed aggression and shamed those that didn't. Fear turned into pride. Soldiers who had run at Kasserine now burned for redemption. The Big Red One, the 1st Infantry Division, perhaps the hardest hit at the pass, became the spearhead of this reborn force under the eccentric but brilliant Major General Terry Allen. German intelligence noticed increased activity, sharper radio traffic, but dismissed it. General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, who took overall command as Rommel departed for medical treatment on March 9, believed 3 weeks was nowhere near enough to transform an army. Rommel himself sent updated warnings from his sickbed, noting rapid American improvement under a new, energetic commander, widely understood to be Patton. But momentum and overconfidence won out. The offensive at El Guettar was locked in for March 23. As German columns assembled, the 10th Panzer Division with its veteran crews, reinforced by heavy Tiger tanks and the Italian Centauro Division, commanders briefed their men on expected American behavior. Fixed defenses, slow reaction, retreat under pressure. Everything was set for a repeat of Kasserine. Then dawn broke on March 23, and the desert erupted in a way no German officer anticipated. American artillery opened with perfectly synchronized barrages that hammered advancing columns before they even saw the enemy lines. Tank destroyers, hidden in defilade, ambushed panzers from the flanks. Infantry held until the last responsible moment, then withdrew in good order to prepared positions, bleeding the attackers every step. By midday the German thrust had stalled, casualties climbing with no breakthrough in sight. For the first time in North Africa, American troops were dictating the tempo. This is where we leave Part 1 on the edge of the revelation. In Part 2, we'll dive into the brutal details of Guettar, how Patton's changes turned the battle, why Rommel's ignored warnings came back to haunt the Axis, and how this 90-day arc from disaster to dominance reshaped the entire war. The Americans didn't just stop losing, they started winning in a way that left German generals speechless in post-war interrogations. The secret behind that lightning transformation is coming next. And just like that, on March 23, 1943, the desert morning exploded with a fury the Germans never expected. As the 10th Panzer Division's tanks rolled forward through the dusty valleys near Guettar, confident in another easy breakthrough, they ran straight into a wall of precisely coordinated American fire. At exactly 6 a.m., dozens of American artillery batteries, 105 mm howitzers, 155 mm long toms, even corps-level heavy guns, unleashed time-on-target barrages. Shells from batteries miles apart landed on the same grid square at the exact same second. The effect was apocalyptic. German tank commanders reported entire platoons disappearing in fountains of earth and flame before they even spotted the enemy lines. Forward observers, now trained to Patton's exacting standards, adjusted fire with calm precision over improved radio nets. No more panicked chatter, no more hesitation, just cold, professional destruction. The veteran crews of the 10th Panzer pushed forward anyway. They had done this 100 times before. But this time, something was horribly different. Concealed American tank destroyers, M10 Wolverines with high-velocity 3-inch guns, opened up from hull-down positions on the flanks, picking off panzers at ranges where German armor was most vulnerable. Infantry of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, refused to break. These were the same men who had been scattered and humiliated at Kasserine just weeks earlier. Now they fought with a controlled fury, holding key ridges until the last possible moment, then withdrawing in disciplined bounds to pre-prepared secondary lines laced with mines and anti-tank guns. Every yard the Germans advanced cost them blood and steel. By late morning, the Italian Centauro division on the German right was already crumbling. Their lighter tanks and poorly motivated infantry ran into overlapping fields of American machine gun and mortar fire. Italian commanders radioed desperate pleas for support that never came. German intercepts picked up American communications that sounded nothing like the chaos of Kasserine. Clear, concise orders, units acknowledging positions, artillery adjusting fire with surgical accuracy. One intercepted exchange captured the new spirit perfectly. An American forward observer calmly reporting, enemy armor column, grid 478 to 192, 20-plus vehicles, send everything you've got. Minutes later, the sky fell on that column. General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, monitoring the battle from his headquarters, received a stream of increasingly grim reports. Penetration was minimal. Casualties were heavy. No sign of American collapse. By early afternoon, with over 40 tanks knocked out and no meaningful breakthrough achieved, Arnim made the call no German commander in Africa had expected to make: suspend the offensive. The attack was called off the next day. German forces withdrew, leaving burning hulks and fresh graves in the sand. Guettar wasn't a crushing Allied victory on paper. Territorial gains were small, but psychologically, it was devastating for the Axis. The Americans hadn't just held, they had dictated the fight and made German armor pay dearly for every mistake. In the aftermath, German intelligence officers pored over captured documents, interrogated prisoners, and studied abandoned equipment, searching for answers. They found none of the expected weaknesses. No new superweapons. No massive reinforcements. Just the same Shermans, the same artillery pieces, the same soldiers. The only difference was how they were used, and who was leading them. Prisoner after prisoner spoke with newfound pride about old blood and guts, the general who had turned everything around in what felt like overnight. One captured American lieutenant told his interrogators, "You hit us hard at Kasserine, and we learned. General Patton made sure we learned fast." Rommel, now in Germany recovering from illness, received the reports with a sinking feeling. His final warnings had been spot on, but ignored. In letters and memoranda from his sickbed, he stressed that the Americans under Patton were no longer the hesitant force of February. They had adopted an aggressive doctrine that neutralized German advantages in armor and tactical skill. Concentrated breakthroughs were met with mobile reserves and immediate counterattacks. Superior German gunnery was countered by overwhelming artillery coordination and air support that was finally arriving in strength. Rommel wrote that future operations against American forces would require entirely new approaches, and far more resources than the Reich could spare in Africa. But the window had closed. Patton's transformed II Corps now advanced relentlessly alongside the British 1st and 8th Armies, squeezing the Axis into an ever smaller pocket around Tunis and Bizerta. The Big Red One, hungry for payback, fought with particular ferocity. In April and early May, American units executed rapid armored thrusts, coordinated infantry assaults, and devastating artillery barrages that German defenders could no longer parry effectively. Axis supply lines collapsed under Allied air supremacy. Fuel and ammunition ran dry. Italian units surrendered in droves. On May 13, 1943, General von Arnim surrendered the remnants of Army Group Africa. Over 250,000 Axis troops, nearly half of them German, marched into captivity. North Africa was lost. The 90 days from the humiliation of Kasserine to the triumph in Tunisia became legend within the U.S. Army. It proved that leadership, doctrine, and mindset could overcome inexperience and material gaps in weeks, not years. Patton's methods, brutal discipline, relentless training, aggressive tactics, and psychological transformation, became the blueprint for American ground forces for the rest of the war. German commanders never forgot the lesson. When Allied interrogators sat down with captured generals in 1945, the testimony was remarkably consistent. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring admitted that American artillery coordination was the best we faced on any front. General Otto von Manschufel, who later fought Patton in the Ardennes, described American forces as learning faster than any army we encountered. They corrected mistakes with terrifying speed. General Fritz Bayerlein, Rommel's former chief of staff, was blunt. At Kasserine we thought the Americans were finished in Africa. 3 weeks later they fought like veterans. Patton changed everything. Even Rommel, in his private papers before his forced suicide in 1944, reflected on the American transformation with grudging respect. He noted that while German doctrine relied on the individual brilliance of tank commanders and technical superiority, the Americans overwhelmed with coordination, volume of fire, and sheer aggressive momentum. Material abundance, combined with a doctrine that rewarded attack and punished hesitation, made them uniquely dangerous. The ripple effects reached far beyond Tunisia. In July 1943, when Patton's newly formed 7th Army stormed ashore in Sicily, German defenders were already primed to expect rapid, aggressive advances supported by crushing artillery and air power. Patton raced Montgomery to Messina, capturing the island ahead of schedule and cementing his reputation. In Normandy the following year, the same principles, mobile reserves, immediate counterattacks, time-on-target barrages, shattered German defensive plans despite fierce resistance. What happened in those 21 days under Patton's command wasn't just a battlefield turnaround. It was the moment the United States Army grew up. From a force mocked as soft and amateurish, it became the most effective ground army the world had yet seen, one that combined industrial might with a doctrine of relentless aggression. The Germans, for all their tactical brilliance and early war dominance, never fully adapted to this new American way of war. They paid for that failure all the way to Berlin. Rommel saw it coming. He warned them. They didn't listen. And because they didn't, the Desert Fox's final campaign ended not with victory, but with the realization that across the front lines stood an enemy that had learned, in the blistering heat of defeat, how to become unstoppable. This is the real story of how 3 weeks changed the course of World War II, and why, even today, military academies around the world still study the transformation at Guettar as proof that leadership and adaptation can turn disaster into destiny. The arsenal of democracy didn't just supply the weapons. Under the right commander, it forged the will to win.